All right, amphibians. Yes, we have arrived to that category. Uh, really fun taxa to discuss. Lots of neat species, cool adaptations, lots of modifications. Really cool group, right? So taxonomically speaking, we're looking at the Lis amphibia. This includes only the extant forms. So there's a lot of extinct fossilized forms. I'm not going to get into those. We're going to focus on the living forms, the amphibians. Yeah, so amphibians. And what makes an amphibian an amphibian? I suspect most of you know, maybe have some experience or at least academic knowledge on frogs or something like that, right? Well, amphibians are going to be characterized by this moist skin. Remember, these are evolutionarily they're that transitional group from aquatic to terrestrial environments. So they have some very primitive characteristics: moist skin, permeable skin, and scaleless skin. So for a amphibian, the skin is not necessarily a real big protective layer, right? What it is, it serves as a respiratory organ. It's the cutaneous respiration. So frogs and salamanders and these amphibians are going to actually transpire gases across their skin. So they literally breathe through their skin. Oxygen comes in, diffuses in through either the water, the air, and then carbon dioxide diffuses out. So if you're literally breathing through your skin, you're going to have a lot of environmental issues where you have to be in environments where there's not toxic things kind of being exposed to your skin. So it always amazes me that they're primitive, but they've survived so long in the evolutionary process. And like you think about it, wow, they don't even have that really good modifications for survival. But hey, they're extant. They're still alive. They're doing what they need to do to stay alive. Yeah, although they are having some big complications that we'll cover later. So these amphibians as adults, they're carnivorous, right? When we talk about amphibian, amphi means like double. So bio means life. So amphibio, bia is kind of a feminized aspect of that, right? But amphibio, double lived. So they're going to have a double life from their, I guess, their larval, their tadpole phase to the adult phase. So they really change. It's like you may have heard of somebody that's bipolar. From one moment they're happy, one moment they're sad. Well, this is even more drastic than that. As a tadpole phase, they're basically fish. They act like fish. They do what fish do, and then they metamorphose, and they have a second phase of their life where they're on land. They're breathing through their skin, and they're hopping around, right? So lots of just big changes. This double-lived category, and the eye structure is unique. They have some what we call green rods, which are basically enhanced photoreceptors that enable them to pick up different light. They don't have the same modifications like a shark or some of the other more advanced vertebrates, but they have this modification which seems to work for them, right? These green rod retinal cells. And we may get into that a little bit later. Let's see. Okay, so what does it mean to be or to have cutaneous respiration? Again, that means that through the epidermis, through the skin, which has to be very thin. Obviously, gas can't transpire through a thick layer of tissue, of epidermis. So they have to have a very thin layer, which makes them susceptible very easily to injury, right? But carbon dioxide will diffuse out, oxygen diffuse in. And there's a very heavily vascularization, a lot of blood vessels at the, just underneath the surface of that skin. So any pollution, any toxic substances in the ponds, in the water, they're going to absorb all that easily as well. So it works, but there's a lot of susceptibility for other complications that we'll get into later. All right, so this is straight out of your book, just showing you some of the phylogenetic characteristics for the group, right? Shared derived characters of the amphibians. So the skin, different papilla, this operculum complex, green rods, little teeth. So I'll let you read through that. this is what justifies the Lys Amphibia category as the Lys Amphibia category, right? These extant amphibians here. So when we say amphibians, what are we talking about, right? We're talking about these groups. We call Anura, Urodela, and Gymnophiona. And there are very well-established names in both Greek and Latin. And some people like to use the Latin term, some people like to use the Greek term, some people interchange. I'm one of these people that just interchange the group or the name sometimes. So Anura is basically frogs and toads, right? So we lump them together. Frogs and toads are anurans. Urodela to me doesn't make a lot of sense, but caudata, caud means tail. And they have a very well-defined tail, right? So I call them caudata, the caudatans. Gymnophiona to me doesn't remind me much of anything except maybe from Shrek, maybe, but doesn't make sense, right? So I like the term apoda, without feet, right? And these apodans, they have no feet. They're Sicilians, they look kind of like worms. They have no legs. Caudatas have a tail. Anurans, well, they're anurans, they're frogs and toads here, right? So it kind of refers to the butt, to the, the tail region as well there, right? So lacking as adults. So frogs and toads, salamanders and newts, and the Sicilian worms here, right? Anura, caudata, and apoda. Let's start with this, what I can kind of consider the more primitive of the groups. And these are strange, and a lot of people don't have any prior knowledge or background to these apodans, right? But they're called Sicilians is a common term. I don't know where they came up with that term, Sicilians. 10 taxonomic families, 205 species. A lot of these are tropical, most of these are tropical. They're legless, that's where they get the term apoda. They're aquatic, or they burrow in very moist tropical type of soils. They do have eyes sometimes exposed, but sometimes they're going to be covered with a layer of skin or bone. Depends on what species we're talking about. But the eyes are not their primary sensory organ for sure. And again, some species lack the eyes entirely. So if you are burrowing, if you're underground burrowing through the soil, eyes don't really make a big sense. They don't, it's dark. There's going to be stuff that can irritate the eyes. So again, eyes are not a primary source of sensory information. They'll use these little, just little barbels, little other types of sensory cues in their world. So a Mexican species here, right? Sicilian worm. And what characterizes Sicilians are these little annuli. So these little conspicuous rings all over their body. So conspicuous folds encircle the body, and they overlie vertebrae and mark rib position. So everywhere we have an annuli, we know that there's a vertebrae and a corresponding rib coming off of there. So again, they have special sensory tentacles on the snout. So you can kind of see that right there. Again, you're burrowing in the ground. That's going to enable them some sort of sensory input. And what do they eat when you're crawling around the ground? You eat worms, you eat invertebrates that you encounter, grubs, things that are burrowed into that soil. And I imagine the tropical soil is full of all kinds of little tasty creatures for them. And that's what they do. That's what they feed on, with a pretty, gruesome array of teeth. So that you can see this is a predatory mouth. That array of teeth is for gripping and holding on to slippery prey like earthworms, things like that. So the Sicilians. Sicilians are a little bit interesting in the form of reproduction, right? They actually have internal fertilization, which is strange for a primitive vertebrate like this. So if we go back, the fish had primarily external fertilization. There's some exceptions, but for the Sicilians, they have internal fertilization via male intromittent organ. We call this the phallodium. Right? The phallodium, I'll let you kind of imagine what that little organ is for there, right? The phyllodeum is protruded from a cloaca. A cloaca is a fancy way of saying a generic hole. It's the hole that is for waste. It's the hole that's for reproduction. It's just a generic hole that these organisms will have. And from that cloaca, during the mating season, during the mating process, the male will extend its phyllodeum and use that to sort of fertilize the female. So internal fertilization. And Sicilian reproduction is diverse, right? We have the egg-laying groups, live-bearing, most of them being live-bearing, about 75%. And again, dermatophagy, I'll let you read into that. If you can think of derm, like a dermatologist, skin, phagy, to eat. So if I have nothing to feed my offspring, right, and they're starving, they need to eat something, well, what these Sicilians start to do is they literally allow the offspring to kind of eat their skin. And it's kind of odd, but they'll increase the thickness of the epidermal layer and let the babies consume that. So it's a way of survival. They have not gone extinct. Seems strange, but it seems to work for what they do. So again, just some artistic renditions of, again, Sicilians, sort of the egg brooding behaviors, some of the respiratory modifications that they can do. So I'm not going to get too much involved with that. But with that, let me stop that there. Sicilians, the Apodan groups, and I'll continue with the Caudatans next.